Are you a newbie entrepreneur looking for a little helpful advice? Then check out today's interview when I talk with an experienced executive coach on this episode of Coffee with Tea. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Coffee with Tea. I am your host, Tanya Tyler, and I'm excited because we're going to be talking to Mr. Jim Shulman, who's going to be actually maybe helping me or those new entrepreneurs who start flying and not figuring out where we're going to land the planes. So today we're going to figure out maybe coming up with a vision. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Jim to the show. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Tanya. It's a pleasure to speak with you.
It's a pleasure to talk to you as well, sir. I love your personality, and you were a delight to talk to in the middle when we had our one-on-one get to know conversation. So I thought you had great energy and a lot of great knowledge that I thought would be really beneficial for people who are like me, who start businesses and really don't really figure out where we're going to land a plane. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be able to talk about this. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. I have coached successful entrepreneurs since 2000 and have seen entrepreneurship in all of its variations, successful, kind of successful, and yet to be successful.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a great way to segue into what we're talking about, but really I want to know a little bit about who you are and really what are some of the big lessons that you learned from 2020? And, because the world got shook up a little bit. So what has helped from you that you've taken away from, what you've learned since, COVID?
The biggest thing that I have seen, and the most important thing, at least in my business, but I should preface it by saying COVID was a horror. 1 in 500 Americans died from COVID and COVID-related disease. So I feel a bit skittish talking about benefits that came out of this without also mentioning that this is the worst possible way to find benefits. But with that said, the fact that stigma of video conversation is gone, and that there was always a little bit of stigma of, well, you're not in front of me in city X, or a real person, who cared about me would be in my office or whatever. And nobody cares about that anymore. It broke that down. For instance, you and I would probably never in a million years have met one another were it not for virtual networking via Zoom or other video. And I have created incredible relationships with people around the planet who I likely never would have met otherwise. So to that extent, it's wonderful. It makes business far more efficient. It makes it, frankly, and for every time that somebody says, well, you don't bump into X in the hall, I can say, well, look at all the people I bumped into the chat on the side of a Zoom call, or being able to, in the course of a conversation, look at somebody's LinkedIn profile and find out interesting things and set up follow-up meetings in a way that you never could at a usual networking event.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, it is a tragedy and loss. Yes. But like I said, I think if you really look there, there's something that you could learn from this experience. So thank you for, for acknowledging the loss. Yes. Loss is never good, but, diving more down into, like I said, we would never have met. Because right now I know you do coaching for those who exceed 10,000 or more, and I'm nowhere near that, but I would love to be there. So we had a chance to connect and stuff like that. You gave me some golden nuggets. So I asked you before we got an interview, how do you learn to land the planes? And your answer was first figure out. You should have had basically an itinerary ahead of time. So what happens with those who don't have one like that? What can we do?
Well, the point goes to, if you're in aviation, you plan your landing before you take off. But the other thing, too, is look at the stakes. the stakes are pretty enormous. In other words, if I was going to take off, considering it's an airplane and there's me and millions of dollars of equipment and people's lives, I better know where I'm going to land. But if I was going to just say run a race or start jogging somewhere, and I didn't know where I was going to stop jogging, well, that's a different story because I'm not hurting anybody and it's not necessarily a threat to life and limb. I look at budding entrepreneurs as being people who are running. And very often with budding entrepreneurs, it's what I call the vortex of activity or huge swirl of activity, where anything and everything is something that you can approach. And anybody who I can sell to, I'll try to sell to. And any interesting new way I can adjust the product to increase sales, I'll do that. And any new opportunity that I can follow. And out of that huge vortex of activity, very often comes success. And that's incredible. But then the next challenge is, what do I do with that level of success and where do I focus next? And it's a little bit like the argument of, well, this is what got me here, but is it what I need to get me there?
I like that. Yeah, like I said, I'm realizing now, where I'm at in my journey is what, I know eventually I have to have coaching to take me to wherever next level I have like that. So it's like, when you're talking about at least awareness, how important is awareness, knowing where you are in your journey? What would you speak on that?
I would say that it is almost impossible to be aware when you're in the middle of something. Okay. You can be aware of the fact that I want guidance or help of where I am at a certain point. I want to know what the options are. One of the characteristics that I have seen among entrepreneurs is they're always interested in the next thing. What could be interesting? What could be better? And a major component of that is quite often is self-improvement. What am I not doing that I could be doing right now? With my clients, for instance, all of them have had some type of professional personal development programs before they've worked with me. In other words, they know what it's like. Dale Carnegie, Goldman Sachs, 10,000 Small Businesses, Sandler Sales, and so forth. And they're constantly looking for more. I've yet to meet an entrepreneur who wakes up and says, boy, I'm satisfied.
Is that I don't think, well, yeah, there are people who are like that. Yeah.
Well, there was a great line in the television series Mad Men, where one of the characters is very aggressively going after an account. And he said, the only thing I'm satisfied with is if you get all the business, not that you have a big market share. And he said, what's happiness? And he says, it's the thing you get before you need more happiness.
Yeah. I love it. So, good point. Good point. So we still got some good time on it. And I want to know, like, what's, when you're thinking about the new budding entrepreneur that's coming on board, especially, transitioning from, everything with being, the way it used to be, the business as usual, as we used to be.
Right.
What would be your advice to those who are now like seeking, thinking like time is now the essence of the change? What would your first advice be for them?
Bluntly, there are two types of people in the world. There are people who get a check every 2 weeks, and there are people who live on what they sell. And one group of people really is not all that compatible with the other group of people. Very usually they don't quite understand why the other group would get out of bed in the morning. So if you're talking about somebody who gets a check every 2 weeks and they say, boy, I'd like to become an entrepreneur and I could do X, Y, and Z, that's usually not how entrepreneurs think. Entrepreneurs just freaking do it. Sometimes they're pushed into doing it and they discover they have a talent and they like to. There was an explosion of entrepreneurship during the COVID epidemic because people who couldn't earn a living, say, one way with their regular job suddenly had to figure out how they're going to do something else. There have been huge numbers of people who started selling goods or services on, for instance, on eBay, or started shops within Amazon, or One extreme are all the people who were making money on OnlyFans and never had done anything like that before the pandemic.
Right. So, I mean, like I said, but I have a question. It's like, how do you, yeah, keep the enthusiasm going when things aren't going the way you would like them to go? As with the entrepreneur, because like I said, there's a lot of people who jumped into it and they're like, okay, this is really not for me. So how do you keep that fire going when you feel like maybe I've made a mistake or maybe this is just not for what I need to do? I mean, how do you know
I'm
when
going
to?
to tell Tanya, an entrepreneur. The analogy I'll give is somebody once asked Pinchas Zuckerman, a very famous violinist, should I become a violinist? And Pinchas Zuckerman looked at this person and said, no, you shouldn't. What do you mean? I play well. I'd like to play in an orchestra. Could you do anything else? Because if the answer is I couldn't possibly do anything else, then you should think about becoming a violinist. If you are a person where you could not think about working for somebody else, you should become an entrepreneur.
That's a good point.
Because the resilience that's necessary is the kind of resilience that I do not have the luxury of just sitting back. I have to make this work.
Oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. So basically, you're just like check your mindset before you even jump into it, which sort of leads us back into the whole vision thing. Land of the planes. Maybe,
Well, I'm going to use another analogy. I love
like your.
analogies.
I always like your
There was
analogies.
a story, and I don't remember the exact details of the campus, but in the 1960s, when state schools were really expanding and getting bigger and bigger and bigger, they were going to put a new campus of a state school in a certain place. And they figured out where the buildings were and so forth. And the new president of the university had a genius idea. No sidewalks. The president waited a year to see where people wore out the path. And then they put in the sidewalks. Because as you know, when they have like a pretty college campus, they have all the beautifully laid out sidewalks. And then there are the dirt paths where people really walk. So they waited to see where do people really walk. And I look at the same thing, worrying about vision and so on and so forth. Just freaking do it, okay? Figure it out. When it's successful, when you find out what you are doing and how you're doing it and what's working or not working, you can take a step back and say, this is what happened and this is why it became successful. I'll give you an example. I know of a very successful religious congregation in Philadelphia. They are about 20 years old this year. It started with 4 or 5 people who said, wait a minute, there is a need in our neighborhood for this type of a congregation. And there was a religious holiday. So they had 6 people who got together in somebody's living room. And it just kept growing and growing. And they had their way of doing things and attracting more and more people. Now they have over 350 families in this congregation. They have a full schedule of activities, and they're stopping and saying, we're now going to have our first strategic plan because we did this, but where are we? What do we do next? It's gotten to the point when it does make sense to have a strategic plan.
Right. Good point. Good point. And I have a question. We're about halfway through. And then I want to remind everybody here, if you're picking up what Jim has been putting down and he's been dropping some golden nuggets and you pick them up, please give us a thumbs up, maybe follow up with a question or let us know how we're doing. And I really want to talk a little bit about, we add on a lot of stuff as entrepreneurs, but when do you know is, how do you address the point of letting go? How do you tell your clients when to scale back on something, because we're always adding, but sometimes to grow, we have to let go. So what's your take on that?
It is a constant reshuffling of your to-do list. Okay. There are the things you would love to do. There are the things you're doing right now. There are the things you need to do. But the key is they're not all the same priority. Many entrepreneurs get stuck in the idea that everything is the number one priority as long as it's in front of their face at that minute. And the point is that isn't necessarily the case. And very often it could be, I would love to develop. I had a conversation the other day with a a company. It was two entrepreneurs. They had 10 products and services that they were offering. And we were discussing one of them that was absolutely fantastic. And it turned out that, is this your favorite of all of them? Well, not really. Well, if it's not your favorite, why don't you sell it to somebody? No, we want to build it and develop it. Okay, what's your capacity? We don't have that much capacity. Well, something is going to give. Do you have things you love to do more than this? Because you can make all the other things profitable if you focused in on them. In their case, they could. And I said, now it's a question of where you want to spend your time and what you want to have happen to it. It may make better sense for you just to license this and push it off on an ice flow, and let it go its own way, or sell it outright because you don't have the capacity to develop it further.
Right. Yeah, that's where I think when we're coming, because we're getting ready to get to the end of the year. So what would your advice be, wrapping up closer to the year? What would your advice to the budding entrepreneur as they wrapping up at the end, coming to the end of the year? What would you say?
Congratulations. If you're still doing it, congratulations. Only a tiny fraction of people are able to continue in an enterprise for a year. Most of them don't last that long. Only a tiny sliver of those wind up lasting 3 years. What I would look at if I was an entrepreneur is start taking stock. What's worked so far? Okay. And if it hasn't been working, what opportunities or trends can I see right now? The great entrepreneurs are always looking for the next thing. And sometimes, and I've seen this happen, a new next thing might show up. Most of the time, it's not more important or more worthy than what's being worked on immediately. Sometimes it is. And sometimes it's so good that you take everything that's happening already and you just put that to the side and put the focus on the new thing.
Good point. And so my last question, well, I got two questions. My last question before my last question is, what's the one thing you want people to take away from this interview if they don't hear anything else that you have to say today? What's the one thing you want them to understand?
Okay, I'll put it this way. Entrepreneurship is a chronic condition. It cannot be cured, but it can be treated successfully.
Love it. My last question then is, where can people find more information about you, maybe connect with you, your services, stuff like that?
Well, I will say that please feel free to visit my website at www.elsinorebA.com. But I will hasten to say, Tonya, that the people I work with are seasoned, very successful entrepreneurs with several years track record. They have employees and so forth. A newbie is not the person who I work with, but I applaud newbies. God bless you. It's a little bit like saying, in The Wizard of Oz, when Oz said, come back with the broom and then we'll talk.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Mr. Jim, for your wealth of knowledge. Thank you for accepting my invitation to come on.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
And I want to remind everybody who tuned in that feedback is always welcome. Remember, links that Jim had mentioned will be posted down there in the description box. So please check it out down there below. If you enjoyed today's show, please give us a thumbs up. Again, follow up with a question. Let us know how we're doing. If you enjoyed all the insight that he shared and you want to get more, please make sure you hit that subscribe button over there. And remember, take things in stride, go with the flow, and create your own path. And we will see you here on another episode of Coffee with Tea. All right. Bye-bye.